You're listening to the Everything Jewish 10 Minutes at a Time podcast, where you'll learn about every Jewish topic imaginable in about 10 minutes. And as always, I apologize for all of my Hebrew pronunciation. I know I'm going to pronounce Hebrew words wrong, so instead of getting annoyed, I give you permission to laugh at how I say things. Today's topic is the Second Jewish Temple and its destruction. Think of this episode as a Netflix historical drama, except you don't have to binge 12 episodes to get the story. We're talking about the massive temple that stood in Jerusalem for centuries, rebuilt after the exile, renovated by King Herod into one of the most jaw-dropping structures of the ancient world, and then tragically destroyed by the Romans. Its loss didn't just knock down a building, it reshaped Judaism forever. Synagogues, rabbis, prayer, study, these became the center of Jewish life because the temple was no longer there. So buckle up. This is both architecture and apocalypse rolled into one unforgettable story. The story begins with the aftermath of the Babylonian exile. The first temple had been destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BCE, and many Jews were carried into exile. About 70 years later, the Persian king Cyrus allowed them to return to Jerusalem. Cue Ezra and Nehemiah, the biblical leaders who oversaw both spiritual revival and actual brick-and-mortar rebuilding. This second temple, completed around 516 BCE, wasn't as dazzling as Solomon's original. Some older folks literally cried when they saw it because it seemed underwhelming compared to the good old days. Still, it was central again. Sacrifices resumed, festivals were observed, and Jerusalem regained its heartbeat. The Second Temple stood through shifting empires: Persians, Greeks, Seleucids, and finally Romans. Along the way, Jewish identity was tested. Think Hanukkah and the Maccabees fighting against Antiochus IV, who had desecrated the temple with idols. The Maccabean revolt restored control and rededicated the temple, an event celebrated every Hanukkah. The temple's survival symbolized resilience, a national rallying point against foreign domination. Now enter Herod the Great, the king famous for paranoia, palaces, and building projects that would make Elon Musk jealous. Around 20 BCE, Herod decided the temple needed an upgrade. Renovation is putting it lightly. It was basically a tear-down rebuild at a mind-boggling scale. He expanded the Temple Mount, building massive retaining walls, one of which survives today as the Western Wall. He reconstructed the sanctuary with white marble and gold so dazzling that ancient historians said it gleamed like snow in sunlight. This wasn't just an architectural flex, it was political. Herod wanted legitimacy with the Jewish people, and beautifying their holiest site was a smart PR move. For decades, pilgrims from all over the Jewish world flocked to Jerusalem for festivals like Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Imagine Times Square, Comic-Con, and the Super Bowl rolled into one, but for spiritual devotion. The temple was the hub of Jewish life, identity, and connection to God. It wasn't just a building, it was the beating heart of a people. But big buildings attract big problems. The temple was also the flashpoint of tension. The Romans controlled Judea, and Jewish resentment simmered constantly. Heavy taxes, insensitive governors, and the presence of Roman troops in the Holy City made things combustible. Inside the Jewish community, factions argued over how to deal with Rome. Some favored compromise, others armed resistance. When you add religious zealots who saw the temple as God's guarantee of victory, the stage was set for disaster. In 66 CE, the Great Revolt erupted. Jewish rebels actually drove the Romans out of Jerusalem for a time, which felt like a miraculous win. But Rome doesn't take rebellion lightly. General Vespasian and later his son Titus led legions to crush the uprising. Picture the Death Star mobilizing against a ragtag rebellion. Only this wasn't Star Wars. This was real, and the consequences were catastrophic. The temple stood at the center of the storm, symbolizing both Jewish hope and Roman rage. It was inevitable that it would become the ultimate target. The climax came in 70 CE. Titus and his Roman legions laid siege to Jerusalem. Food ran out, factions inside the city fought each other, and conditions grew desperate. Josephus, the Jewish historian who defected to Rome, gives us haunting details: starvation, infighting, and unimaginable suffering. Finally, the Romans breached the walls and stormed the Temple Mount. Despite Titus allegedly wanting to preserve the temple, soldiers set it ablaze. Flames engulfed the sanctuary, melting gold that dripped between the stones. The grandeur of Herod's masterpiece was gone in a single night of terror. Tens of thousands were killed, and survivors were enslaved or scattered. The Arch of Titus in Rome still shows Roman soldiers carrying off temple treasures like the menorah and trumpets, a cruel victory parade carved in stone. The destruction wasn't just military, it was spiritual devastation. Jews had lost the place where heaven and earth met, where sacrifices connected them to God. An entire way of worship ended in fire and ruin. After the temple's destruction, Judaism faced a crisis of identity. Sacrifices could no longer be offered. Pilgrimages could no longer happen. Some might have thought the religion itself would collapse. But here's the plot twist. Instead of disappearing, Judaism transformed. Rabbinic Judaism emerged, with Torah study, prayer, and mitzvot as the new pillars. The synagogue became the local center of Jewish life. Rabbis replaced priests as the primary spiritual leaders. Out of tragedy came reinvention. This shift also meant Judaism could survive without a central sanctuary, essential for a people who would live in exile for centuries. Think of it like switching from a single central server to a cloud system, decentralized, portable, and resilient. The destruction of the temple was heartbreaking, but it pushed Judaism into a new era that made it adaptable across time and geography. Without that transformation, Judaism might not have endured. In a paradoxical way, Rome's fire forged the Judaism we know today. Even so, the memory of the temple never faded. To this day, Jews mourn its destruction on Tisha B'Av, a summer fast day marking both the first and second temple's fall. Daily prayers include pleas for the temple's rebuilding. At weddings, a glass is broken under the chuppah to recall that even in joy, the temple's absence is felt. And the Western Wall remains the closest accessible remnant of the temple, a place where Jews and visitors alike leave written prayers between its ancient stones. The longing for the temple became central in Jewish imagination, not just about a building, but about restoration, redemption, and wholeness. In a sense, the temple lives on, not in marble and gold, but in memory, ritual, and hope. It's like having a screensaver of your childhood home that burned down. You can't live there anymore, but you keep the image alive, waiting for the day it might return. The Romans thought destroying the temple would erase Jewish spirit. Instead, it gave rise to a Judaism they couldn't crush. Still, the destruction had ripple effects far beyond religion. Politically, it marked the end of Jewish sovereignty for nearly 2 millennia. Economically, Judea was devastated, its population diminished and scattered. Spiritually, debates raged. Was God punishing Israel? Would a Messiah come soon? Different groups answered differently. Early Christianity also interpreted the temple's fall as significant, shaping its theology. The temple's destruction was one of those hinge events in world history, like the fall of Rome or the discovery of the New World, where everything afterward looked different. It was not only the end of an era, but the beginning of a new one. If the temple was Judaism 1.0, then post-temple Judaism became Judaism 2.0, upgraded, portable, and built to last in exile. Painful, yes, but also strangely providential in hindsight. In modern times, the temple continues to matter, not just historically, but emotionally and spiritually. Archaeologists dig around the Temple Mount, historians study Josephus, and tourists gawk at Herod's engineering feats. But for Jews, the temple is more than history. It's a symbol of what was lost and what is still hoped for. Debates over whether it should ever be rebuilt are complex and sensitive, especially given today's political and religious realities in Jerusalem. But even without stones being laid, the idea of the temple continues to shape Jewish consciousness. It's invoked in prayers, songs, and theology. You can't talk about Jewish history, identity, or spirituality without referencing the temple, because its destruction was not the end of the story. It was the fire that refined a people, forcing them to adapt and survive. The temple may have been destroyed, but Judaism wasn't, and that resilience is perhaps the most important part of this saga. So that's the story of the Second Jewish Temple and its destruction. A structure rebuilt from exile, glorified under Herod, destroyed by Rome, and yet alive in memory and ritual. It reminds us that sometimes the center of a people's life can be knocked down, yet that doesn't mean the people vanish. Instead, they rebuild in new ways. Think about it. Without the temple's destruction, we might not have the Judaism we know today. Synagogues, rabbis, study, prayer. The building burned, but the people didn't. And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. Stones can fall, gold can melt, but ideas endure. Judaism survived not by clinging only to a past structure, but by reshaping itself for the future. And that's why, nearly 2,000 years later, we're still telling this story, in podcasts, no less. So next time you see the Western Wall or hear about Tisha B'Av, you'll know the long, powerful history behind it.